So the first part about optimal nutrition is really understanding the parts and pieces of how the horse works from his digestive standpoint, okay? So we're going to go through how he digests a meal, what he gets from it, and then also go over some pitfalls to be aware of with the way the horse's digestive system is built. So when a horse ingests a meal, it starts at the mouth. He chews the feed, swallows it, goes down the esophagus into the stomach. Now, the horse's stomach is very small for the size of the animal. I have some examples here that the vet school was kind enough to loan me, and you can come take a look at these close up if you would like to later. But for the size of the animal, his stomach is fairly small. There's different sections of this stomach, and hydrochloric acid is constantly secreted from the horse's stomach, and that's where we start to break down that feed. We get some denaturing of some proteins and things like that, but not really much absorption happens in the stomach. Really, the magic starts to happen when we get to the small intestine. In the small intestine, it's very long, and this is the site of enzymatic digestion in the horse. So the enzymes are going to start to break down those carbohydrates. They're going to break down the proteins and absorb the amino acids, and they're going to break down those fats and absorb those fats. So a lot of magic happens in the small intestine. It's a very important part of the digestive system. So from the small intestine, we're going to be absorbing sugars like glucose, and we're going to be absorbing fats and also amino acids. And then after that digesta passes through the small intestine, we get to the hindgut of the horse. And this is where we have fermentative digestion. So there's microbes in the hindgut that start to break down those structural carbohydrates, the fiber, okay? And the horse absorbs volatile fatty acids, which he can use as an energy source, right? Anything that's left over, that's not absorbed and not utilized or can't be utilized by the animal, is then excreted out the rectum, all right? So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of how this system works. So what does the horse get out of this? The first thing as a nutritionist that we balance for in a horse's diet is energy. What calories does he get out of it? Okay, not all sources of calories are created equal. So from those sugars and the fats, the sugars that he gets from the small intestine, he can use those for really fast types of energy. So if we're exiting out of the roping box, or we are barrel racing, something along those lines. If you need those really fast bursts of energy, the horse can do that because he can digest and utilize those sugars and starches to supply that energy source, okay? He can also be very efficient at absorbing and utilizing fats. The fats and the volatile fatty acids are a very slow, sustained source of energy for the horse so that he can go all day long. So the nice thing about this system is he gets that fast energy and he gets that sustained energy. So he can meet all the needs that we have of our ranch horse. Now, like I said, with the benefits come some pitfalls that we need to be aware of. So let's discuss those briefly. I said the horse's stomach is very small for the size of the animal, and I also said it secretes hydrochloric acid. Now, this is not a meal response secretion of acid. The horse's stomach is constantly secreting that hydrochloric acid, okay? Now, that becomes a problem if there's nothing in the stomach to absorb and utilize that acid. So if we are meal feeding horses or they don't have forages in front of them to absorb that acid can build up, and that's where we can sometimes have problems with ulcers, okay? So the horse is really designed to be a continual grazer, right? He's designed to constantly have something on his stomach to absorb that acid. So really important to keep that in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that horses cannot regurgitate. Anything that comes in the front has got to go all the way through and out the back, which can become a problem if they ingest something that's toxic. When we ingest something that doesn't agree with our stomachs, it can come up. The horse cannot do that. So anything that they ingest has to go all the way through the small intestine where it can be absorbed in the bloodstream and cause some problems. And the other thing that I wanted to hit on is starch. Sometimes there's a lot of commercially available feeds that advertise low starch, no starch diets. And sometimes we can get the impression that starch is kind of a dirty word when it comes to equine nutrition. But I can tell you that starch can be beneficial to some classes of horses. Not all of them need high starch in their diet, but our high-performing horses can get a lot of benefit from starches because that's where they get that high energy need, right? So if you have a performance horse that has high energy requirements, starch in the diet is not a bad thing. It can be very beneficial. The problem comes when we overload starch. Okay, so let's say, for instance, a horse, because they are Houdinis, they get out of their pen and they get in the feed room and they gorge themselves on feed in the feed room that has starch in it, right? And starches, in the plant, starch is just a storage form of sugars, the energy in the plant, okay? So they ingest all of these starches. Now the small intestine tries really hard, it gets those enzymes in there to digest all that starch, but if there's too much, some of that starch is going to pass to the hindgut. And this is, I'll try to lift it up here, and I would encourage you to come take a look at this, but this is the hindgut of the horse, very large, okay? All of that is wadded up inside of your horse, and this isn't even the small intestine, this is just the hindgut, okay? Now, if that starch reaches the hindgut in a large enough amount, the microbes in the hindgut, they kind of wig out and they start to die. And then we have problems like colic and founder. So starch is not a dirty word, but it does need to be managed appropriately to make sure we don't overload the horse's system with too much starch in the diet. Now, do our pasture horses at maintenance, do they need a high starch diet? No, we're talking about our elite performance horses. If you're going to the SHOT shows every weekend, or you're VRH horses or barrel racing, you're going to the roping every weekend, those types of horses would need that energy source. But typically, we don't need a lot of starch in our diet for the majority of horses.